Hey you, where's the real manager? I won't deal with you.
Sir, I am the manager. Please lower your voice.
You dare speak to her like that? Are you okay, my dear?
She had rebuilt herself so quietly that nobody noticed, until the one person who broke her walked through the door of her new life and tried to finish the job. What he didn't know was that the most powerful man in the building was watching. And for the first time in years, An Jae-hong was paying attention. If you've ever rebuilt yourself in silence while someone waited for you to fail, this story is for you. Zarya didn't beg, break, or bother with revenge. She just won. Like this video, subscribe, and let's make sure David types everywhere see exactly how this ends. The thing about starting over that nobody tells you is that it doesn't feel like starting over. It feels like Tuesday. It feels like a 6:47 a.m. alarm in a studio apartment where the heating has opinions but no follow-through, and the coffee from the bodega downstairs tastes like someone boiled ambition in recycled disappointment and charged $4 for the experience. It feels like pulling on a uniform that costs less than your old lunch breaks and riding a subway car where everyone is performing the very convincing act of not existing. That was Zarya Okoye's Manhattan. Not cinematic, not triumphant, just relentlessly, honestly alive. She was 34 years old, 6 months divorced, and technically overqualified for every task she performed before noon. She had a first-class economics degree from Howard, a postgraduate certification in hospitality management from Cornell, and the particular kind of quiet competence that made organizations run smoothly and pay her modestly for the privilege. She could read a balance sheet and a human being with equal accuracy. She remembered the names of guests' children, the specific temperature preferences of returning clients, and the precise moment a conversation shifted from pleasant to performative. She was exceptional in the way certain tools are exceptional, indispensable, underestimated, occasionally left in a drawer. The hotel that had agreed to employ her temporarily was called Hanul. 17 floors of pale stone and dark restraint in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of establishment that didn't advertise because its guests didn't need to be told where to go. They simply arrived, as wealthy people do, with the confidence of individuals who have never once questioned whether they were expected. Zarya had chosen it for 3 precise reasons. First, it paid well enough to cover rent and dignity in that order. Second, it required discretion, and she was currently very interested in being invisible. Third, it existed at a comfortable distance from her former professional world, the mid-size hospitality firm where she had managed 3 departments, received quarterly praise from executives, and received quarterly silence from the husband who attended the same meetings and behaved as though she were a well-dressed stranger who occasionally said things he hadn't thought of first. David Coleman. She did not think about him before coffee. She had implemented this as policy. After coffee, she permitted herself approximately 90 seconds of reflection, during which she typically concluded the same thing she had concluded for the past 6 months. She had not lost anything she actually wanted to keep. What she had lost was the version of herself that had slowly learned to stand at half height, so that a man of average depth could feel tall beside her. That version was gone. Good riddance to her. Hotel Hanul had its own particular atmosphere, which Zarya had cataloged within her first week the way she cataloged everything, thoroughly and without sentiment. The lobby was lit with deliberate subtlety. The staff moved with the coordinated quiet of people who understood that efficiency, performed loudly, was merely stress in a uniform. The guests arrived and departed with the unhurried authority of individuals who had learned that urgency was, at its core, a middle-class emotion. And above all of it, quite literally, existed An Jae-hong, the owner, the architect of all this curated silence. The Korean billionaire who occupied the 17th floor and descended from it so rarely that newer staff occasionally wondered, in hushed tones, whether he was architectural rather than biological. Nobody had a clear photograph. Nobody had a confirmed anecdote that didn't arrive third-hand. What they had were impressions, fragments, and the particular mythology that accumulates around powerful men who refuse to perform their power for an audience. He had reportedly rejected a partnership with a major European luxury group on the grounds that their brand philosophy was performing depth rather than having it. He had stood in the hotel kitchen for 6 uninterrupted minutes and then informed the executive chef, a man with 2 Michelin stars and the ego to match, that the tasting menu lacked moral seriousness. The chef had quit, reconsidered his entire philosophy of food somewhere in the vicinity of a long walk and a humbling amount of silence, and returned 2 weeks later with 3 new dishes that a food critic subsequently described as the most emotionally coherent meal currently available in Manhattan. Nobody knew what made An Jae-hong laugh. The working assumption was nothing. Mrs. Park, the head concierge, a precise, composed woman who had survived 4 general managers, 2 Category 1 weather events, and 1 incident involving a minor European royal and a very confused service elevator without once adjusting her posture, had assessed Zarya in the first 40 minutes of orientation with the efficiency of a customs official reviewing documentation. "You read people," she said, "not a question." "Occupational habit," Zarya replied. Mrs. Park considered this for a moment with the expression of someone filing information in a location only she had access to. "Here," she said finally, "that is either very useful or very dangerous. We will find out which." Zarya had smiled and returned to her station. For 6 weeks, life at Hanel was precisely what she needed it to be: structured, absorbing, and quietly restorative. She learned the rhythms of the hotel the way you learn the rhythms of a new city. First the map, then the texture, then the specific sound it makes at 2 a.m. when it thinks no one is listening. She was good at the job. Embarrassingly good in the way that people are good at things below their ability, easily, almost accidentally, with the slight melancholy of someone who has brought a racing engine to a parking lot. She did not complain. She was rebuilding, quietly, on purpose, without audience. And then on a Thursday evening in November at 9:14 p.m., the lobby doors opened. She knew before she looked up. There is a particular disturbance in the air that certain people create when they enter a room. Not presence exactly, but the announcement of an expectation. The silent broadcast of a man who believes the room has been waiting. David Coleman walked into Hotel Hanul with his new girlfriend on his arm and the expression of someone arriving at a destination he was already planning to own. He was wearing a coat that cost more than her first month's rent and carrying the specific confidence of a man who had moved efficiently from one chapter of his life to the next without pausing to examine what he had done to the previous one. He saw her. She watched the recognition cross his face in 3 stages: surprise, recalibration, and then, most revealingly, amusement. The smile arrived slowly, like a verdict being read. He approached the desk. And Zarya Okoye, who had come to Manhattan to disappear, stood completely still and understood with perfect clarity that the next 60 seconds were going to require everything she had rebuilt in the last 6 months. She straightened, she breathed. She smiled the smile of a woman who no longer needed to be anything other than exactly what she was. "Let him come," she thought. "I've been waiting without knowing it." The lobby, elegant and well-trained in the art of not noticing, began to notice. And somewhere above, on the 17th floor, an elevator descended without explanation, the way certain things begin before anyone understands they have started. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone from your past show up exactly when you'd finally stopped needing them to? If David's particular kind of cruelty, the kind that smiles while it diminishes, reminds you of someone, hit like. And if you believe women who rebuild quietly deserve to win loudly, subscribe. David and everyone like him would prefer you didn't. David Coleman had always possessed the remarkable ability to make cruelty sound like concern. It was, Zarya had concluded during year 3 of their marriage, his single greatest talent, greater than his networking, greater than his curated LinkedIn presence, which described him as a visionary connector of people and purpose, with the kind of confidence that required absolutely no self-awareness to maintain. Greater than his ability to arrive late to everything and somehow make the room feel grateful he'd bothered. He had the gift, and he was unwrapping it now, right here, in the lobby of Hotel Hanel, with his new girlfriend standing beside him like a prop he'd selected for maximum effect. Zarya. He said her name the way people say the name of a restaurant they used to love before it went downhill. Nostalgic, slightly pitying, entirely unbothered. "I didn't know you were working here." "Most people make a reservation before they arrive," she replied pleasantly. "How can I help you this evening?" His smile widened. That was the thing about David. Pushback that didn't come with emotion confused him briefly, and then delighted him. He interpreted composure as an invitation. "We have a reservation. Coleman, party of 2. He leaned against the desk with the casual authority of a man who had spent years making himself comfortable in spaces that belonged to other people. I had no idea this is where you landed." Landed. As though she were a plane that had experienced some turbulence and been rerouted to a regional airport. "I didn't land," Zarya said, pulling up the reservation with the smooth efficiency of someone who intended to process him and move on. "I chose. There's a distinction." His girlfriend, a woman with the careful beauty of someone who had recently learned that being decorative required significant maintenance, glanced between them with the dawning awareness that she had walked into a conversation with walls she couldn't see yet. Right, right. David nodded slowly, performing thoughtfulness. So this is, what, a transitional thing? While you figure out the next move? The lobby had not changed. The pale stone was still pale. The lighting was still precisely calibrated. The guests nearby were still performing the well-practiced Manhattan art of absolute disinterest. And yet something had shifted, the way temperature shifts before weather arrives. Two colleagues behind the desk found reasons to adjust things that didn't need adjusting. The bellman near the entrance developed a sudden interest in the middle distance. Mrs. Park, stationed at the concierge desk 12 feet away, did not look up from her computer. But she had stopped typing. Transitional, Zaria repeated, as though testing the word for structural integrity and finding it wanting. That's interesting framing. I'd describe it differently. Oh yeah? David's tone carried the gentle condescension of a man who believed he was about to win something. How would you describe it? She looked at him then, fully, directly, with the unhurried attention of a woman who had spent 4 years studying this particular subject and had since defended her thesis. Intentional, she said. I'd describe it as intentional. Silence. Not the silence of awkwardness. The silence of a room recalibrating. David recovered quickly. He always did. That was the machinery of him. I just mean, you were doing so well at Meridian. 3 departments. Everyone said you were the most capable person in the building. He paused. The pause was deliberate. It's just surprising to see you. Here, behind a desk, in a uniform. Somewhere below what he had decided her ceiling should be, now that he no longer needed her to have one. Zaria set his key cards on the desk with the quiet precision of a woman placing the final piece of an argument. David, she said, you spent 4 years being surprised by me. You'd think by now you'd have learned to expect it. The lobby laughed, not loudly, not unkindly, the restrained, involuntary exhalation of people who had been holding something and were quietly, suddenly relieved of it. David's smile stayed on his face the way a flag stays on a pole after the wind has stopped. Technically present, no longer doing anything useful. His girlfriend looked at Zaria with an expression that was difficult to categorize but contained, somewhere in its composition, a question she hadn't known she needed to ask. And from above, from the upper balcony where the mezzanine curved toward the elevator bank, a man who had not been there a moment ago stood at the railing and said absolutely nothing. He didn't need to. His stillness said it for him. Zaria hadn't looked up yet. She would. But first she slid the key cards across the marble desk with a smile so composed it could have been framed. Room 912, she said. Checkout is at 11. Enjoy your stay. She found out about the balcony at 11:47 p.m. Not from a guest, not from management. From Tolu, the night audit clerk who had the organizational discipline of a spreadsheet and the conversational restraint of someone who had never once encountered a piece of information they didn't feel morally obligated to share. He was watching, Tolu said, appearing at Zaria's elbow with the energy of a woman delivering classified intelligence. She was whispering, which for Tolu meant she had reduced her volume to the level of a normal human being. From the mezzanine. The whole thing. Start to finish. Zaria did not look up from the occupancy report she was reviewing. Who was watching? Who was? Tolu exhaled. Zaria. An Jae-hong. The man who owns the building we are currently standing inside. That who. This produced a pause. A short one. Zaria was not a woman who granted situations more pause than they deserved, but this particular piece of information required a brief structural assessment before she could file it correctly. Are you certain? She said. Mrs. Park confirmed it. Tolu's eyes were very wide. Mrs. Park, who has confirmed approximately 4 things in the 2 years I have worked here, confirmed this. So yes, I am certain. Zaria set down the report. She thought about this with the same methodical calm she applied to everything. A calm that was not the absence of feeling, but the disciplined management of it. The way a well-designed building manages pressure not by eliminating it, but by distributing it so intelligently that nothing collapses. Then she picked the report back up. Okay, she said. Tolu stared at her. Okay? That's okay is what you're giving me right now? What would you prefer? Panic, excitement, some human response that confirms you understand the gravity of... The owner of the hotel observed a standard guest interaction, Zaria said evenly. Nothing unusual occurred. Tolu opened her mouth, closed it, and then turned to look at the mezzanine balcony with the expression of a woman who had witnessed something historic. and was frustrated by the singular lack of appropriate ceremony surrounding it. He laughed, she said finally quietly, as though the word itself was fragile. Zarya, that man laughed. Do you understand what I am telling you? In 2 years, I have seen him enter this lobby exactly 3 times. He has never smiled. He once told the head of events that the annual gala theme was aesthetically dishonest and walked away. He does not laugh. And tonight, because of you, he laughed. Zarya was quiet for a moment. Go finish the audit, Tolu. Tolu went. But she went slowly and with feeling. Zarya did not sleep well that night, not because of David. She had processed David Coleman a long time ago, filed him under expensive lessons in the cost of shrinking, and moved on. The encounter had confirmed nothing she didn't already know. He was exactly what he had always been. The only thing that had changed was that she was no longer required to stand next to it and call it home. It was the other thing that kept her awake. The balcony, the stillness, the laugh she hadn't heard, but that apparently an entire lobby had registered like a seismic event. She had looked up too late to see his face clearly. A figure at the railing, dark suit, the posture of someone who occupied space without negotiating for it. And then the elevator doors had closed, and the mezzanine was empty, and the lobby had exhaled and gone back to performing normalcy. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Not the storm itself, just the air acknowledging that something was coming. She told herself she was being dramatic. She was not, historically, a dramatic person. She went to work the next morning and said nothing about any of it. The summons arrived at 2:17 p.m. Not an email, not a message through management. A note, actual paper, cream-colored, the kind of stationery that understood its own significance, delivered to the front desk by An Jae-hong's personal assistant, a composed young man named Mr. Seo, who moved through the hotel like a well-edited sentence and spoke only when the alternative was ambiguity. The note said 4 things. Miss Okoye. My office. 3 p.m. AJH Zarya read it twice. Then she read it a 3rd time, not because the content was complex, but because she was giving herself the 3 seconds required to ensure that her face communicated nothing to the 7 people currently pretending not to watch her read it. Mrs. Park appeared at her side with the timing of a woman who had been waiting at a precise distance. I would suggest the navy blazer, she said without looking at the note. It is in the staff coat room. I placed it there this morning. Zarya looked at her. Mrs. Park returned to her desk without elaborating. The 17th floor was different from the rest of the hotel the way the top of a mountain is different from its base. Structurally connected, experientially separate. The elevator opened to a corridor of dark wood and indirect light and the specific silence of a place where decisions were made. Mr. Seo met her at precisely 3 p.m. Confirmed her name with a nod that suggested he had already known everything relevant about her for some time, and led her to a door at the end of the corridor. He opened it. He did not follow her in. The office was large without announcing it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city in the manner of a painting someone had decided to make inhabitable. There were books, not decorative books, red books, with the particular disorder of volumes that had been opened and returned without ceremony. A desk, 2 chairs. And behind the desk, standing with his back to her, looking at Manhattan with the attention of a man conducting a private conversation with it. An Jae-hong. He was taller than the mythology had suggested. Or perhaps it was simply that mythology, by nature, flattened things it couldn't fully measure. He turned, and Zarya, who prided herself on reading rooms and people with equal accuracy, found for the first time in recent memory that she needed a moment longer than she expected. He was not what the stories had prepared her for. The stories had prepared her for cold. This was something more precise than cold. This was a man who had decided at some point that attention was a limited resource, and he would spend it only where it was warranted. He looked at her the way he had presumably looked at the kitchen, at the renovation plans, at the European partnership proposal, with complete, unhurried, slightly dangerous focus. Miss Okoye, he said. His voice was even, measured. The voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it. Mr. An, she replied, a silence that was somehow not uncomfortable. Then, and she would think about this later, alone in her studio apartment with the unreliable heating, the corner of his mouth moved, fractionally. Almost nothing, almost. I have a problem, he said, and I believe you are the solution. Zarya had been called many things in her professional life. Capable, thorough. Occasionally, by managers who meant it as a compliment and didn't understand why it landed differently, intimidating. She had been called a problem solver, a stabilizer, and once, memorably, by a senior partner at Meridian who had consumed 2 glasses of wine at the annual retreat, the only adult in any room she enters. She had never been called a solution, certainly not by a man who delivered the word the way An Jae-hong delivered it, with the quiet finality of someone who had already done the math and was simply sharing the result. She sat down in the chair across from his desk without being invited to, because standing while someone told you they needed you was a posture that belonged to a version of herself she had left in a different city. "Tell me the problem," she said. He studied her for a moment. Not with surprise. She had the impression that An Jae-hong was rarely surprised, that he had arranged his life with sufficient precision to make surprise largely unnecessary. It was something closer to confirmation, the expression of a man checking a calculation he had already trusted. He sat. "Hanul is expanding," he said. "A second property, Chicago, opening in 7 months." He turned a document on his desk 45 degrees in her direction without sliding it across, an invitation to look, not yet to touch. "The general manager I appointed resigned 3 weeks ago. Personal circumstances. I have interviewed 9 candidates since then." Zarya glanced at the document, architectural plans, budget projections, a timeline that was, even at a brief glance, ambitious to the point of philosophical optimism. 9 candidates, she said. None of them were right. What made them wrong? He looked at her with an expression that suggested the question had been the correct one. "They understood hotels," he said. "They did not understand what this hotel is trying to be." "And what is it trying to be?" The question landed in the room and sat there. He let it. She was already learning, a man comfortable with the weight of an unanswered question. Comfortable in the way people are comfortable with things they have chosen rather than things they have simply tolerated. "Honest," he said finally. "Expensive and honest. Most luxury is performance. Surfaces designed to make people feel significant. Hanel is not interested in making people feel significant. It is interested in being significant. There is a difference that most people in this industry cannot identify, let alone build." Zarya was quiet for a moment. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan conducted its relentless, gorgeous, exhausting business. 37 floors below, somewhere in the grid of it, her studio apartment sat with its unreliable heating and its honest coffee and its complete absence of pretense. "You watched me last night," she said. It was not an accusation. It was not even particularly bold. It was simply the next true thing in the conversation, and she had learned, was still learning, would probably always be learning, that true things, stated plainly, had a structural integrity that no amount of careful positioning could replicate. He did not flinch. "I did." "Why were you on the mezzanine?" "I come down occasionally, when the building requires it." "The building required it last night?" "Apparently," he said. And there it was again, that fractional movement at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architectural suggestion of one. Zarya looked at him steadily. "Mr. An, I'm a guest relations associate. I've been employed here for 6 weeks. Whatever you observed last night was exceptional," he said, simply, without decoration. She stopped. He continued, with the unhurried momentum of a man who had decided where this conversation was going and saw no reason to take a scenic route. "You de-escalated a situation that had the potential to become a reputational incident. You did it without aggression, without appealing to authority, and without sacrificing the dignity of the hotel or yourself. You read the room, you read the man. And you responded with a precision that I have not observed in this lobby in 4 years of ownership. A beat. I also read your file this morning." "My file," she repeated. "Howard, Cornell, 3 departments at Meridian simultaneously, with a 17% increase in guest satisfaction scores during your tenure, and an operational cost reduction that your superiors apparently absorbed credit for without comment." He said this last part without inflection, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd editorialized. "You are not a guest relations associate, Ms. Okoye." "No," she agreed quietly. "I'm not." "So." He folded his hands on the desk with the calm of a man closing a bracket he had opened deliberately. "Chicago." The word sat between them like a door. Zarya looked at it. She looked at him. She thought about the 7 months. The timeline on that document. The 9 candidates who had understood hotels, but not this one. She thought about Mrs. Park placing a navy blazer in the coat room that morning with the timing of a woman who had known, before Zarya did, how the day was going to end. She thought about David Coleman on the other side of this building, sleeping in room 912, believing that the woman he'd spent 4 years diminishing had washed up somewhere manageable. She thought about a Chicago property that needed someone who understood not just the mechanics of luxury hospitality, but the philosophy of it, the difference between performing significance and actually having it. She thought about her studio apartment, the heating that was a suggestion, the coffee that tasted like ambition in a paper cup. And she thought about the particular, clarifying feeling of being seen accurately, not flattered, not managed, not strategically appreciated, but seen, clearly, by someone who had done the reading. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, not resistance. Something that sat closer to interest, the specific interest of a man who had spent years being agreed with and found, in this moment, the alternative considerably more compelling. "Of course you do," he said. "Competitive salary, relocation, full operational authority. I don't want a title that sounds like leadership while someone above me makes the actual decisions." She paused. "And I want to understand the vision before I commit to building it. Not the document version, the real version. What you actually want Hanel Chicago to be." He held her gaze for a long moment. Outside, Manhattan kept moving. It always kept moving. That was the contract you signed when you arrived. The city would not wait for you to figure yourself out. It would simply continue, magnificently, indifferently, and you either moved with it or you stood still and called that a choice. "Dinner," An Jae-hong said. "Tomorrow evening, I will tell you what I want it to be." It was not a question. It was also, she noted, not entirely professional. She noticed this the way you notice weather. Not with alarm, simply with the understanding that conditions had shifted and it was reasonable to update your expectations accordingly. "Dinner," she said. Not agreement, not refusal. A word placed carefully at the edge of a decision she hadn't made yet. He nodded once. The meeting apparently was complete. She stood, straightened the navy blazer that Mrs. Park had known she would need. At the door she paused. "Mr. An," she said without turning fully. "The 9 candidates who were wrong, did any of them negotiate?" A silence. "No," he said. She nodded once and walked out. Behind her, in an office on the 17th floor, a man who almost never smiled sat alone with the city and did something his assistant would not have recognized. He smiled. Not fractionally this time. Fully. Quietly. To no one but himself and Manhattan. And he picked up his phone and told Mr. Seo to make a reservation for 2. The restaurant was not the kind of place that needed a name on the door. It had an address, presumably, somewhere in the administrative record of the city. It had a chef whose reputation preceded him by approximately 3 continents. It had tables spaced with the generosity of an establishment that understood the most expensive thing it could offer its guests was the absence of other people's conversations. What it did not have was a sign. Zaria stood outside it for exactly 4 seconds. She permitted herself 4 seconds of external adjustment before entering any room that mattered, and noted that the absence of a sign was itself a kind of statement. If you need to be told where you are probably somewhere else. She went in. An Jae-hong was already there. Of course he was. He was the kind of man who arrived first, not because he was eager, but because waiting, for him, was a form of preparation. He was seated at a corner table with a glass of water and the particular stillness of someone who had not spent the last 4 seconds adjusting anything. He stood when she approached. She noted this too. Not because it was remarkable, it was simply courtesy, but because David Coleman had stopped standing when she entered rooms sometime around year 2, and the body, she had learned, remembers the specific texture of being regarded. "Ms. Okoye," he said. "Mr. An," she replied and sat down. The menu arrived. She read it the way she read everything, thoroughly, without performance. He watched her read it the way he had watched her in the lobby, with the complete, uncurated attention of a man who found the subject genuinely interesting and had no interest in pretending otherwise. She ordered without deliberation. He ordered without looking at the menu, which meant he had either been here many times or had decided in advance, and she suspected both were true. "You said you'd tell me what you want Hanel Chicago to be," she said once the menus had been collected. "I'm listening." He appreciated this, she could tell. The directness, the absence of preliminary social architecture, the small talk and careful positioning that most dinners of this kind required before anyone said anything true. "My father built the original Hanel in Seoul," he began. "In 1987, he had no investors, no family money. He had a building he'd purchased at a price that reflected its condition accurately, and a philosophy he had developed over 20 years of working in hotels that did not share it." He paused, drank water, continued. "He believed that luxury, done honestly, was an act of care, not performance. Not the theater of significance, the candles and the marble and the staff who smile with the precision of people who have been trained to smile. A beat. Care. Genuine attention to what a person actually needs, delivered without requiring them to perform gratitude for it. Zaria was quiet. She was thinking about the lobby, the lighting, the staff who moved with coordinated quiet, the way the building held itself, not like a showcase, but like a place that took its own hospitality seriously. The Manhattan property built his philosophy, An continued. I want Chicago to extend it, not replicate it, extend it, a different city, a different character, but the same foundation. He looked at her. Most general managers I have spoken to want to build a hotel. I want someone who wants to build a position, a thing that stands for something in that city specifically. What does it stand for in Manhattan? She asked. Honest refuge, he said, for people who have spent the day performing. She thought about this. About 17 floors of pale stone and dark wood and lighting that cost more per fixture than her rent. About guests who arrived with the unhurried authority of people who had nothing to prove, and the way the building, quietly, intentionally, made space for that. Chicago is different, she said. Manhattan performs even in its silence. Chicago is more direct, more willing to be exactly what it is without apology. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to catalog, the one that arrived when she said something that aligned with a calculation he'd already made. Confirmation, she had decided. He was a man who thought carefully and then looked for evidence that the thinking had been sound. Yes, he said, simply. Then the Chicago property can't just be Hanel in a different city. It has to translate the philosophy into a different language. She reached across the table and turned his water glass 90 degrees, not deliberately, simply the gesture of someone thinking with their hands. Same values. Different expression, or it's just a copy, and copies don't stand for anything. The food arrived. They ate. They talked. The conversation moved. Through the operational specifics she needed to understand, through the timeline, through the budget, through the particular challenges of launching a luxury property in a market with its own established hospitality hierarchy. He was, she discovered, extraordinarily precise. He did not use imprecise language. He did not say probably when he meant yes or we'll see when he meant no. He said what he meant with the economy of a man who had learned, at some cost, that clarity was a form of respect. She found this, against her better judgment, profoundly attractive. Not in a manner she intended to act on, simply in the way you find precision attractive when you have spent years in close proximity to its opposite, to a man who used words the way he used everything, strategically, to manage rather than to communicate. She filed the observation. She did not examine it further. Not yet. The salary, she said over the second course. I want a number that reflects the role, not the role I currently hold. I know what the role is worth, he said. The number will reflect that. And the operational authority, I need that in writing before I accept. Naturally. And I want to be involved in selecting the design team. Not consulted. Involved. There's a distinction. I know the distinction, he said. And the way he said it confirmed that he did, that he had lived professionally in the territory between those two words long enough to understand exactly where the line fell and why it mattered. Dessert came. Neither of them ordered it, but the kitchen sent something anyway, small, precise, a single composed thing on a white plate that managed to be both beautiful and unsentimental. She looked at it. Your father, she said. Is he still involved? Something shifted in his expression. Subtle. The kind of shift that happens when a question arrives in a room that has been carefully arranged to not require it. He passed, An said. 4 years ago. I'm sorry. The Chicago property was his idea, he said quietly. He visited once, said it was a city that deserved honesty. Zaria looked at the small, precise thing on the white plate and thought about a man she had never met who had spent 20 years developing a philosophy of care and then built a building around it. She thought about her own father, a practical, exacting man from Lagos who had told her, at 17, that the most powerful thing a person could possess was a standard they refused to lower. She thought about 4 years of lowering it. She thought about 6 months of rebuilding it quietly in a studio apartment with unreliable heating. She thought about Chicago. She looked up. An Jae-hong was watching her with the attention she was beginning to understand was simply how he existed in the world. Fully present, completely focused, in the manner of someone who had decided that anything worth doing was worth doing without distraction. I'll need 2 weeks to review the full operational documents, she said. You'll have them tomorrow. And I want to visit the Chicago space before I sign anything. I'll arrange it. She nodded. He nodded. Outside, New York continued its magnificent, indifferent business. Inside, at a corner table in a restaurant with no sign on the door, two people who had each, in different ways, spent years in the company of things that were not what they appeared to be sat across from each other and said true things. It was, Zaria thought on the way home, the most honest dinner she'd had in years. She was in the subway before she realized she was smiling. She didn't stop. The heating in her apartment when she got home was actually working. She chose to consider this a sign. The documents arrived at 7:03 a.m., not emailed, delivered. A structured portfolio in a matte black folder with Hanel Group embossed on the cover in the kind of typography that understood restraint. Mr. So, presumably, had appeared at her building's front desk at some point before most of Manhattan had decided to be conscious, handed it to a bewildered overnight doorman, and vanished with the quiet efficiency that appeared to be his singular personality trait. Zaria was on her second coffee when she opened it. She did not move for 2 hours. The documents were extraordinary. Not in the way that impressive corporate packages were extraordinary, thick with optimism and thin with specificity, but in the way that genuine plans were extraordinary. They had weight. They had contingencies. They had a construction timeline so precisely annotated that she could tell which decisions had been made with confidence and which had been made with the particular careful handwriting of someone who understood they were guessing and wanted the record to reflect their honesty about it. There was a section titled Philosophy of Space that read nothing like a business document. It read like a letter. Someone, she suspected she knew who, had written 3 pages about what a room owed the person sleeping in it, about the difference between a hotel that provided comfort and a hotel that understood it. She read it twice. Then she made a third coffee, which she didn't usually do, and read it a third time. By 9:30, she had 12 pages of notes, 4 structural questions, and the uncomfortable clarity of a woman who had already made her decision and was simply generating documentation to confirm what she already knew. She was going to Chicago. The realization arrived not with drama, but with the quiet inevitability of something that had been true for longer than she'd admitted. The way you recognize, at a certain point, that you've known the answer to a question since before you asked it. She was going to Chicago, and she was going to build something honest. She called Mrs. Park. "I wondered when you would call," Mrs. Park said by way of greeting. "Did you know?" Zaria asked. Not accusatorially. Simply as a woman who appreciated accurate information about the degree to which she had been managed. A pause that contained more information than most people's full sentences. "I observed," Mrs. Park said carefully, "that Mr. Ahn had reviewed your employment file the morning after the lobby incident. I also observed that Mr. CO booked a dinner reservation for 2 at Soma that evening." Another pause. "I placed the blazer in the coat room as a precaution." "A precaution," Zaria repeated. "You were always going to be more than a guest relations associate," Mrs. Park said with the matter-of-fact delivery of a woman stating meteorological fact. The only variable was timing. Zaria was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Park," she said, "how long have you worked for him?" 11 years. "And in 11 years? He has offered 2 people a position by personal invitation," she said. "The executive chef, after the incident with the tasting menu, and now you." The briefest pause. "He does not do things without reason, Miss Okoye. He is not a man who acts on impulse and constructs justification afterward. When he moves, it is because he has already seen the destination." Zaria absorbed this. "Thank you," she said. "Review the indemnity clause on page 41, Mrs. Park replied. "The language is favorable but worth understanding precisely." And then, because she was Mrs. Park, "Good luck, though I don't believe you'll need it." She was still at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize and answered anyway because the day had already established itself as one where unexpected things arrived with purpose. "Zaria." "David." She recognized the voice the way you recognize the sound of a door you've permanently closed. Familiar, distant, belonging to a different floor of a building you no longer lived in. "How did you get this number?" she said. Not a question, a statement that contained one. "You haven't changed it." A pause waited with the particular confidence of a man who interpreted the absence of a blocked number as an open door. "I saw you last night, in the lobby. You looked." "I'm aware of what I looked like," she said. "Was there something you needed, David?" A beat. The recalibration she recognized, him adjusting, finding the angle. "I wanted to apologize," he said, "for how that came across. I wasn't trying to—" "You were," she said, pleasantly, without heat. But it's fine. I'm not interested in the apology. Zarya. I mean that genuinely. Not as a performance of indifference. I'm actually not interested. She moved a document from one stack to another. I have a full day. Is there something specific you needed? Silence. Then, in a register she recognized as the one he used when pleasantness had failed and honesty arrived by default. Are you seriously taking a job with him? She went still. Excuse me? An Jae-hong. The name arrived in his mouth with the texture of something he found difficult to hold. It's all over the hotel staff, apparently. You were seen going to 17. People talk. People do, she agreed. Zarya. His voice shifted into the register she recognized as the one he reserved for advice she hadn't requested. I know how these things look. A man like that, he notices a woman, he manufactures a reason to elevate her, and then… David. She said his name with the same quiet precision she had used in the lobby, not loudly, not bitterly, with the measured calm of a woman who had made peace with the fact that some people would always interpret her accomplishments as the product of someone else's interest. I want you to hear me very clearly. He read my file, my actual professional file. Howard, Cornell, 7 years of documented performance. He offered me a position commensurate with my qualifications. A pause. I know that particular explanation doesn't fit the narrative you need, but I'd encourage you to make peace with it. Silence. A long one. I'm just concerned, she said. Yes, you always were, generously, consistently, strategically concerned. She closed the matte black folder. Goodbye, David. Genuinely, I mean that as a permanent thing. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the particular silence of a woman who had just closed the last door she needed to close. Then she opened the folder to page 41, found the indemnity clause, and read it with the focused attention of someone who understood that the best revenge on a man who spent 4 years underestimating you was not anger, not confrontation, not a single devastating sentence in a hotel lobby. It was building something extraordinary. In a city he had never thought to look for her in. Her phone lit up again. A message from an unsaved number she recognized immediately. Chicago visit confirmed. Thursday. AJH. She looked at it for a moment, then she saved the number. Under his name. His full name. And then she did something she hadn't done in longer than she could accurately remember. She allowed herself, quietly, privately, in a studio apartment with heating that had decided today to cooperate, to feel genuinely, uncomplicatedly excited about what was coming next. Not performing excitement, not managing it, just feeling it. The documents were still spread across her table. The city was still outside her window, conducting its relentless business. And somewhere on the 17th floor of a hotel she would soon be leaving, a man who had seen her accurately was already planning the next move. She picked up her pen. She got back to work. Chicago received her the way Chicago receives everyone who arrives with something to prove. Directly. No ceremony, no concession to sentiment. Just the flat, honest geography of a city that had been built by people who understood that beauty and utility were not opposites, that a thing could be both functional and magnificent, and that the lake did not care whether you were ready for it when it decided to show you what wind actually meant. Zarya stepped off the plane at O'Hare on Thursday morning with the matte black folder under her arm, 12 pages of annotated notes in her bag, and the specific kind of alertness that arrives when a person understands, in their bones, that they are standing at the precise moment where preparation and opportunity have finally agreed on a time to meet. An Jae-hong was not on the plane. He was already there. Of course he was. He was waiting outside the site, a former heritage building in the West Loop, 7 stories of early 20th century brick and iron that had spent its recent decades as a series of increasingly optimistic commercial ventures, and was now standing with the patient dignity of something that had always known it was waiting for the right person to understand it. He was looking at it when she arrived, not at his phone, not at documents. At the building itself, with the particular attention she had come to recognize as his default mode of engagement with anything he considered worth his time. He turned when he heard her. Miss Okoye. Mr. An. They looked at the building together for a moment without speaking. This was, she had learned in the past 2 weeks of working alongside him through the operational documents and 3 video calls that had run longer than scheduled and covered more ground than either of them had formally acknowledged, becoming a pattern. They were comfortable with shared silence in a way that felt earned rather than accidental. The silence of 2 people who had each, independently, decided that words were worth using precisely or not at all. Tell me what you see, he said. She looked at the building. The brick was original, the color of dried clay, darkened at the edges with a century of weather, and the particular patience of a structure that had survived things it hadn't been designed for. The iron detailing across the upper windows was intact, extraordinary, the kind of craftsmanship that had been expensive even when labor was cheap and was now simply irreplaceable. The ground floor had been gutted at some point by someone who had mistaken removal for renovation, leaving a raw, honest interior visible through the covered windows that was simultaneously damage and possibility. I see a building that was built to mean something, she said, that was subsequently asked to mean several things it wasn't, and arrived here still structurally sound because the original intention was genuinely good. She paused. I see the Chicago property. He looked at her with the confirmation expression, the one that had stopped surprising her and started feeling, quietly, like something she looked forward to. The ground floor needs to be restored, not redesigned, she continued, walking toward the entrance. The iron detailing is the architectural language of this building. Every interior decision should be in conversation with it, not competing. The lobby can't be a Manhattan lobby. It needs to feel like it grew here. She stopped at the entrance and turned back. And the restaurant should face the street. Not hidden, not elevated, street level, visible, available. Chicago eats publicly. It shares tables. The Manhattan property turns inward. This one should turn out. He had followed her to the entrance. He was standing close enough that she was aware of it in the precise, inconvenient way she had been trying to manage for 2 weeks. The awareness you develop around someone whose proximity has begun to feel, against your most organized intentions, significant. The design team I've shortlisted agrees with you on the ground floor, he said. They proposed the same approach. Good shortlist, she said. You helped make it. She had. 3 of the 5 firms on the final list were there because of notes she had sent him at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday with the subject line, revised design considerations, and the slightly guilty energy of someone who had told themselves they were done for the evening and then wasn't. He had responded at 11:47 with 2 words. Agreed. All 3. She had stared at that message for longer than was strictly professional. They went inside. The building was extraordinary in the way unfinished true things were extraordinary. Rough, honest, full of the kind of potential that didn't need to be imagined, because it was simply visible, sitting in the proportions of the space and the quality of the light, and the particular way the afternoon came through the south-facing windows and landed on the original floor like an argument for restoration. They moved through it together. She talked. He listened, occasionally asked questions that were precise enough to confirm he had read everything she'd sent him. And once, when she demonstrated the lobby flow using herself as a hypothetical guest and walked a path that took her past a structural column she immediately identified as the natural anchor for the check-in experience, said simply, "Yes, exactly that." It was, she thought, the most collaborative she had felt in a professional space in years. They were on the 4th floor, future suites, windows facing west toward the river, when he said, without preamble, the thing that changed the register of the day. I want you to know that the position is genuine. She turned from the window. I know that. I want you to know that I am aware of how it could appear. He was looking at her with the directness she had cataloged from the beginning. No management, no strategy, just the plain face of a man saying what he meant. A woman joins the staff. An incident occurs. The owner summons her to 17 and offers her a significant position. A pause. I am aware of the narrative. David called me, she said. He presented that narrative in detail. Something moved in his expression at the name, brief, controlled, but present. What did you tell him? That you read my file? She held his gaze. That the work spoke for itself. It did, he said. It does. Another pause. But I want to be honest with you, Ms. Okoye, because I think you deserve honesty, and I think you can identify the absence of it reliably enough that attempting it would be insulting. She waited. The file told me you were qualified, he said. The lobby told me something else. The building was quiet around them. 4 floors up, facing west, the afternoon light was doing its honest work on the original floors, and the city was outside the windows conducting its direct, magnificent, unapologetic business. And An Jae-hong was looking at her with the complete attention of a man who had decided that clarity was a form of respect, and that this particular moment warranted his very best version of it. It told me, he said carefully, that you were someone I wanted to know. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of something true, giving it the space it deserved before deciding what to do with it. Zarya looked at him for a long moment. She thought about David Coleman and 4 years of being dimmed. She thought about 6 months in a studio apartment rebuilding herself with discount coffee and deliberate silence. She thought about Mrs. Park and navy blazers and a note on cream paper that said, "I have a problem, and I believe you are the solution." She thought about a man who had read 3 pages about what a room owed the person sleeping in it and understood, without being told, that the same principle applied to people. "I want to be clear about something," she said. He waited. "I am taking this position because I am qualified for it and because the work is worth doing." A pause. "Not because of anything else." "I know," he said. "And anything else," she continued, "would need to develop on its own timeline, without affecting the work." "I agree completely." "And slowly," she said. "I don't do things quickly anymore. I used to. I've revised my position." The corner of his mouth moved, not fractionally this time, with genuine unguarded warmth, the full version of the expression she had been collecting pieces of for 2 weeks. "I am a patient man, Ms. Okoye," he said. "I once waited 6 years to acquire a building because the timing wasn't right." She looked at the exposed brick, the original iron, the afternoon light on the honest floors. "Was it worth it?" she asked. "Every building I have waited for has been," he said. She understood precisely that they were no longer talking about buildings. She turned back to the window. Below them, Chicago moved with the direct, purposeful energy of a city that did not perform its own magnificence, but simply lived it, frankly, fully, without apology. "I'll sign the contracts Monday," she said. "I'll have them ready." She nodded. He nodded. And they stood together in the honest, unfinished space of something that was just beginning. Not rushing it, not performing it, simply allowing it to be exactly what it was. Which was, she thought, the most Honel thing either of them had ever done. 6 months later, Honel Chicago opened on a Thursday. The reviews called it the most emotionally coherent hotel in the city, a place that understood what it was, a place that turned toward the street and meant it. The general manager, the papers noted, was exceptional. Zaria Okoye read the reviews at her desk on the 7th floor in an office with west-facing windows and original iron detailing and afternoon light that landed exactly where she had said it would. She had a coffee, good coffee, not the discount kind, though she kept a bag of that too on a shelf, because she had decided that the studio apartment years deserved to be remembered rather than erased. Her phone lit up. A message from a saved contact. The flowers in the lobby. They're honest. AJH. She looked at it for a moment. Then she smiled. Not fractionally, not carefully. Not with the managed composure of a woman who had learned to keep her reactions at half volume, fully, quietly, to no one but herself in Chicago. She typed back. "I know. I chose them." She set the phone down, turned to the window, and looked at the city that her father had once told her deserved honesty. He had been